Hello, this is Margarita Monet from Edge of Paradise, and you are listening to the Metal Pit Podcast.
Welcome to the Metal Pit Podcast, where we delve deep into the albums and bands that shaped metal. Please visit us on our website at www.themetalpit.org, and you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at The Metal Pit, and our YouTube channel is at The Metal Pit 666. And if you have any questions or comments or album suggestions about this podcast, I have an email for it, so you can email us at podcast@themetalpit.org. I am your host, Blake. I am the creator of the Metal Pit website that we have here, and it's been around on and off for over 20 years. And the current version is almost at 3 years with my current version. And today my guest is one of my current writers, Jim, who is from Nova Scotia, Canada. How are you today, Jim?
I am awesome, Blake. Thanks for having me. This is great.
And yes, and this is your first podcast episode.
Yes,
and
super excited.
Yes, and you've only been on the Metal Pit for a few months there writing reviews, but you've wrote many reviews in the few months that you've been there. And you're supporting everybody else's reviews too, and that's awesome. We love that. And since this is your first time, just tell me, actually, because I guess I don't really know either, and our listeners, how you got into heavy metal music in general.
Oh, geez. Well, it's been a long road being of 52 years, and being able to grow up as a kind of a child of the late 70s, early 80s. My first album I ever got, which was a kind of a cool story. I was at a flea market. I was buying a Saturday Night Fever, the double album, and in a pile of albums for like $4. And inside the sleeve, without the sleeve of the album, was Judas Priest, Sin After Sin. So put that on, blew my mind. And then since then, I've been just absolutely freaked out over metal. In the early 80s, got into, Def Leppard, High and Dry, Pyromania, Motley Crue, the first couple albums, and then started, as things started to progress throughout the 80s, became kind of a really big thrash enthusiast, with Metallica's first albums, Overkill, Testament, and just kind of progressed from there. And then obviously kind of went backwards as I started really liking a lot of bands like Saxon, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, obviously, and what we're going to be talking about today with Deep Purple, going backwards, and then, on Sabbath, looking at and seeking out all those albums from the early 70s and that, where I was obviously too young back then, but and that's where it grew from, and continued through the bleak part of the 90s, I guess you could call it. And I'm excited to be writing for the Metal Pit, seeking out a lot of new bands, listening to a lot of new stuff, and I massively appreciate the opportunity to hang out with you guys.
That's great. And I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're on the website, and I'm glad you're here with me tonight. And yes, as you mentioned, we're going to talk about Deep Purple. A couple episodes earlier, we did Black Sabbath's Paranoid, which I wasn't a big fan of. The other two guests on the show were big fans of it. And I thought, well, geez, I listened to Deep Purple more than Black Sabbath even back then. So I thought, let's do a Deep Purple album. And there's no better Deep Purple album, I don't think, than Machine Head from 1972. And I'm just going to give a little quick bio of Deep Purple. Of course, they're from England, and they were formed in 1968 when I was 2 years old. They are considered one of the pioneers of heavy metal, along with like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin. But when they started out, they were kind of like psychedelic rock and progressive rock. And they did a lot of stuff with classical orchestras, which John Lord liked doing. And then Ritchie Blackmore said, I want to do a rock album, probably after he heard Led Zeppelin's first couple albums and Black Sabbath's first couple albums also. because just recently watched a documentary on Richie Blackmore, actually, and it was him and John Lord that started Deep Purple. And they said, we need to find a singer like Robert Plant. We need a screamer. And then they went and found Ian Gillan. Even because he wasn't on the first couple, I don't have that all listed here. He wasn't on the first couple albums. Rod Evans was the singer of Deep Purple before, but I think Ian Gillan was on In Rock, I believe, was his first album with Deep Purple. I could be wrong about that, but that is really their first hard rock album, was their 1971 album In Rock, or was that, yes, 1971, or was that 1970? I could have the wrong date.
In Rock
there.
was 70. Yeah.
Okay, it was 70, and then they had Fireball, which was 1971, which was the next one. And then came 1972's Machine Head. And of course, there's a heavy metal group called Machine Head, and I'm sure that's where they got their name. So let's see. So In Rock featured the songs Child in Time and Speed King, which were heavy on their live albums too. And it also had the non-album single Black Knight, which is also a pretty heavy song. And then in 71, yes, I have the wrong year there. 71, they released Fireball, which wasn't as good, I didn't find, as In Rock, but it did have Strange Kind of Woman on it. And Fireball is a pretty good track too, but they kind of went away a little bit from the heavy rock, but then they really went all out with the Machine Head album. And this is actually their sixth studio album, I believe third with Ian Gillan, but again, I could be wrong on that. And let's see, I'm going to skip. I have some stuff written down. I'm going to skip it because it's mostly about where they recorded it. And we can talk about that later when we talk about one of the songs, which also talks about where they recorded it. This is their most commercially successful album, going number one in many countries, including the UK, of course, Finland, Germany, and Canada, and others. And the band on this album is, Ian Gillan on vocals and harmonica, Richie Blackmore on the guitar, Roger Glover on the bass, John Lord on the keyboards, Hammond organ, which is prominent, of course, and Ian Pace on the drums. Ian Pace is actually the only member that has always been a member of Deep Purple, because they've had many, many lineup changes, and I'm definitely not going to try to tackle that in this podcast episode. So we're gonna let's see about, when did you first hear Deep Purple then? I know you kind of mentioned it a little bit in your intro there, but
yeah, 1984's Perfect Strangers album. I used to hang around in the early and mid 80s before I started working to support my cassette and album habit. I was hanging around a record store at the local mall, and there was this kind of older, kind of a hippie-ish dude, and I was buying a lot of the new, like, Motley Crue, Iron Maiden at the time, the newer Judas Priest albums and stuff. And he said, I saw this huge display of Perfect Strangers in the record store, and I always, it wasn't predominant on Much Music or MTV, but it was, I heard a couple of the singles off of it, like Knocking at Your Back Door and that, and it just, I was always, my friends weren't necessarily into it. So he talked me into buying it and said I wouldn't be disappointed. I bought it on cassette. And I'll tell you, I went back about 2 weeks later with my allowance, and I ended up picking up, he told me, you got to go back and get Machine Head. So it kind of went backwards for me. It did that with a lot of bands. Saxon kind of followed the same sort of route, Motorhead as well. But, and then I picked up Machine Head, and I put it on, and even in 84, when, I guess it would be the reuniting of the band, that lineup, essentially, it sounded like it could have been released, right then. It had great staying power. And my buddies started getting into some of the Deep Purple stuff. And we started, like, buying a lot of the albums, like Burn after that, and, Come Taste the Band, and In Rock, Fireball, and just really collecting it up after that, and becoming a pretty huge fan. Unfortunately, I've never seen them live, so but I do have, obviously they have a massive amount of live recordings, so I'm always picking up a live album, and definitely anything online that I can watch, and they're just amazing. So kind of a neat story, and it's always fun to go backwards to a roots of and look at that. I mean, when this album Machine Head came out in 1972, so I was only 1 years old. So to be there in 84 and then go and buy it, I mean, that's pretty cool. I think that's pretty neat. So
Yes. Now I'm trying to think for myself. I probably heard them on the radio and stuff first. Smoke on the Water probably was on the radio.
yeah.
And I can't even because I asked you about to set up for this question, and then I didn't really think of it myself because but I think I probably because if you listen to some other podcasts, I got into heavy metal really by The Number of the Beast by Iron Maiden. But I'm pretty sure I listened to Deep Purple before that, but it wasn't, of course, called heavy metal back then. And I would listen to Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple and thought I like this stuff better than I do whatever Foreigner or Styx or whatever that I might have listened to before. So I like them more.
And that's true. That's a good point, because you on the rock stations here in the Maritimes, they were kind of considered more of that fringe rock, with Zeppelin, a few Black Sabbath tracks they would play. So yeah, it probably leaked into my psyche by just hearing, like, obviously Smoke on the Water, and it probably leaked in Highway Star, that sort of thing. So definitely, I agree with you there for sure.
Yeah, so I can't remember. I'm kind of thinking Machine Head probably was my first Deep Purple album. I used to listen to a shortwave radio station out of the States that played heavy music, and they probably played some songs too, like Highway Star. Probably heard it that way, and that's probably why I went and got it. But I'm a little vague on when I first heard Deep Purple. But actually, also I had a friend in high school that liked Deep Purple. Maybe that was, now that I remember that, because he really liked Deep Purple. So maybe that might have been actually why or how I got into them more. And I think, and you mentioned the live. It was I've only seen them live twice. I think once was the Perfect Strangers tour that you mentioned, that you heard that album. So I remember going to that with my friend there, because they reunited, and I thought, let's go see them, because I've never seen them live. And that was at Maple Leaf Gardens. That was one of the last concerts at Maple Leaf Garden before they it's not closed, it's open under a different name now, I guess. Yeah. But and that was Girls School open for them, and that was April Fool's Day 1985. Not that I remember it, I looked it up, so I cheated. And then I saw them in 2007 in London, Ontario, at an outdoor music festival called Rock in the Park. And that was with Steve Morse on the guitar instead of Richie Blackmore. And I might have seen them one other time, but I tried looking through the lists of concerts that I could find, and I couldn't remember exactly for sure, but I kind of thought maybe I saw them one other time. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, so we're going to start talking about the album. Now, there's only 7 songs on this. So, but they're all good to me. We're going to start with their opener, Highway Star, and I'll let you talk first about Highway Star.
Oh man, I mean, you hit it on the head. I think the album's only 38 minutes or something long, and you think about albums nowadays, they're putting a lot of bloat on albums nowadays, a lot of bands. So This is cutting edge material, and it's just so good. I think you can look at the Led Zeppelin, you can look at Black Sabbath and Deep Purple. That's the birthplace of heavy metal as far as I'm concerned. And Highway Star, it just reeks of metal. It's it's a fast tempo song. It's definitely got some classical stuff to it, which I really, really like. And I think I read an interesting fact that it was actually written on a tour bus, I think the year earlier, while they were on tour, probably for the album, the previous album. So that's pretty neat. But I mean, it's just and you talk about covers. I mean, if you look at there's almost 20 bands that have done a cover for all these songs. And I mean, my favorite cover for this song, which, is by Metal Church. They do a wicked cover on their first album, and they definitely give it a good homage. But I mean, this is a great song, one of my favorites. I mean, I guess I'm kind of like you, where I pretty much, I mean, for me to pick a weaker song on the album, it was hard to do that. I will mention one a little later on, but still, a weaker song would be between 9 and 10. So, and I don't want to give away my rating yet, but I mean, this song is a classic for sure.
Well, I was going to say about Metal Church, so you stole that from me. But yeah, I love Metal Church, and I love their version of Highway Star to finish off their debut album. And it's, it's a little bit heavier, a little bit faster, but I think it's awesome with David Wayne there on vocals, who's passed away now, of course. But yeah, so it was a great cover by them. And I was reading, I know Faith No More, I guess, did a cover. I don't think I've ever heard their version of it, though, even though I love Faith No More, so I should look that up. And Dream Theater, of course, is I don't know if any, do you listen to Dream Theater much?
Absolutely. I like Dream Theater quite a bit.
I know they've done a lot of albums or other people's albums. Like they've done live shows, and they've done like Master of Puppets in its entirety. And they've done one of the Pink Floyd ones. I'm not sure. I don't think it was The Wall, but it might've been the Dark Side of the Moon one. And so they love doing that. And they've also did Deep Purple's live album Made in Japan. They actually they did a version of the live album, and it's pretty cool to hear. So if you haven't heard that and you like Dream Theater, make sure you check it out. And if you haven't heard Deep Purple's Made in Japan, I'm not sure which one to tell you to listen to first. They're both pretty cool. But anyway, so Highway Star for me. Yes, I love the song, of course. And yes, I read that Blackmore took part, or classical composer Bach is one of the things he had in mind as he was writing the guitar parts for it or whatever. But we've already covered it because you said how great it is. And yes, and they also used to start a lot of the concerts with Highway Star, which I thought was surprising. But they started their live album Made in Japan was started with Highway Star, and they did a lot of that. And actually, I looked up the concert list of the one I saw, Perfect Stranger, and they started that show with Highway Star also.
Nice.
It's weird. You think they'd save that for near the end, but
yeah.
Anyway, then we got Maybe I'm a Leo. Now, Ian Gillan was a Leo. I don't know if that had anything to do with it. I read Roger Glover, the bass player, wrote the main riff after hearing John Lennon's song, How Do You Sleep? Now, of course, I've never heard that song. But anyway, he must have got an idea from listening to that. Now, this probably isn't one of the best songs on the album, but like I said, I love every song. So this is just a little slower than Highway Star. But of course, always great solos. And I could say that about every song here, whether it's John Lord's solos or on the keyboards or the organ, or if it's Richie Blackmore's awesome guitar solos. And I had stuff written here about Dream Theater, which I already said. So what do you think of Maybe I'm a Leo?
You took the words out of my mouth. This was the one that would be my, if I had to pick one, if I was made to pick, I couldn't say all of them were awesome. This one would be probably my weaker one on the album, although it definitely isn't one I skip. So, yes. I mean, it's got that bluesy sound to it. It's so cool. I mean, that bass riff is just so wicked. It's a little slower paced. I think it's got a good spot on the album because you light it up with Highway Star, and then you go into this to kind of chill out a little bit. From what I understand, now I've never seen them live, and you generally have some stats and stuff. I'm not sure if you have any, but I looked it up and it said that this is rarely played live. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but
yes, I didn't do what I do in some of the other episodes just because they're such an old band. I thought, I don't know how accurate it's going to be for that, but I did read a few songs on here. I have notes where it says they didn't play the song much live. So yes, this is one of them that they didn't play live that often.
But I mean, I like it. It's just, it's probably my weakest one on the album, but weak being still a number one song on many other bands' albums. So, yes. And I feel the same way. You took a lot of the words right out of my mouth with that one. So,
well, you did it on the first song, so I had to do it on that one. Then we go to Pictures of Home, and I'll let you talk and see if you can take the words out of me then.
I like this album, or sorry, I like this song. I mean, that drum intro is just, I mean, it just pounds, breaks into such a cool guitar riff. I mean, you know, Blackmore, you can sit there, and this guy is a musical genius. I mean, they all are musical genius. So when it
Mhm.
comes down to it, it just, you know, it's just awesome. And I mean, that bass line again is just killer. I mean, you know, I like this one. It's still not my 100% favorite on the album, but it's up there in my top three. You know, and I don't know if you're an Ingve fan or not, but he covered this. He covered a number of Deep
Oh,
Purple songs on his Inspiration cover album, and I know there's, you know, I kind of am a deep, I kind of am an Ingve fan, so he does a really good cover of it. I thought it was really well done and really really interesting, and he gave it its just due for sure. But I really like this. I really like this song.
yes, I like this. I mean, well, I like every song, but but I love the John Lord's distorted Hammond organ. It's in
Yeah,
this one. It's you never think of an organ as being heavy, but on
that's
this
true.
song and a few other songs, we'll get to one other one later that especially you hear it. But it's just great to hear that. Like, is this where I said I don't know? I wrote this all down, but I don't usually listen to too many bands that have a keyboard or an organ as one of the main parts of the songs. It would be Deep Purple here, and it would be the band I mentioned previously, Dream Theater, as I
Yeah.
love their keyboards too. But that's probably these are probably the only two bands where I really listen to them that it's so prominent in the music. And so, and yes, and his keyboards are definitely a catalyst on this track. Also, it's kind of, and it's cool to have a organ keyboards, you know, kind of leading the track in a way, even though you
Oh,
still get, of
absolutely.
course, a killer guitar solo from Richie Blackmore in there, and also a bass solo from a short one, but a bass solo in there from Roger Glover also.
Yeah.
And I guess you could call them the little thing at the start a drum solo, but it's only a few seconds.
Yeah. It's a
Take.
great intro. Great intro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we go to Never Before. Now, so I'll start with this one, I guess. Excuse me. And this also starts a little drum intro. And this is one of the ones that they didn't play live very much, which kind of surprises me because it's kind of like a sing along chorus, like the Never Before part. And you'd think this would be a song to play live and have the people singing along with it because it's kind of melodic, more melodic than some of the other choruses are in the songs. And to me, I just mentioned the keyboards leading the last song. The drummer is Ian Pace, kind of leads this part of the song because he's a big part of the song. And you really hear him in it. They do slow down in the middle. It's kind of a little trippy kind of feel, hippie, trippy, whatever kind of feel. But and this is actually one of the singles released from the album, which also is also surprising why they didn't play it live more. But what do you
Yeah.
think of Never Before?
This, believe it or not, is my favorite song on the album.
Oh,
Favorite song on the album. It's got. I'm not a huge Beatles fan, but I am a fairly big Doors fan. So I find it has elements of like it's got kind of that like Beatlesque, I guess you could say, sort of melody to it, and it's
mm-hmm.
got a little bit of a Doors groove to it. It's got a really good groove to it. I like it. I mean, I was kind of shocked too. Like when I read, I believe this was the first or second single released, and I think "Smoke on the Water" was the third, if I'm correct. And
Yes.
I was kind of shocked that they went with this one ahead of it. But I think maybe it's got a little bit more. Maybe they thought that it had a little bit more commercial appeal to it than it maybe ended up having. But it's my favorite song on the album, and I agree. It's got some great stuff in it, and I like that slowing in the middle, and it kind of goes into a bit more of a chorus than what we're used to, than what we've been used to with Deep Purple leading up to this actual album, and that's probably why many of these songs became such classics, and this album did so well commercially. I
Yes.
think that is something that definitely happened. But no, this is my favorite song, my favorite number one song on this album.
That's great. Now that was okay. If you're talking vinyl here or cassettes, I guess that was the end of side one. There's only 7 songs. There's only 3 songs in side two, but this could be one of the best sides of any hard rock album ever. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's my opinion anyway. And we start off with Smoke on the Water. Now I have a whole bunch of stuff written here for Smoke on the Water, but I'll let you go first and see which parts you don't say.
Good God, I mean, there's so much history with this song. I mean, I'll be honest. I knew parts of it, and then when you had asked me to kind of come on here, I definitely started getting deeper into my research, and wow, it just blows you away what went into, first of all, recording this album, and then all the meaning behind the song, which comes out of essentially a fire. And here we have in December of '71. They've got you've got Frank Zappa. He's having a concert at the Montreux Casino, and a fan, which is, from what I understand, in a lot of European countries, a flare gun went off and ended up catching the venue on fire, and essentially the whole casino burned down. And I believe it was the last night in December where they were closing it, and Deep Purple was set to go in and record, and they had I think they borrowed from the Rolling Stones an actual mobile studio to bring in there. So when this happened, and it'd be great, thankfully, I believe there was no fatalities from what I read from this fire. So that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But they went in there, and they were going to go in there, and they ended up having no place to record. So they ended up having to find another place. And I think what I'll do is I'll hand it over to you, because you look like you're chomping at the bit there. Because this is such a great story, and I'll let.
Well, yeah, I'll add to what you were saying there. That so they had to find another place to record, so they searched for an alternative venue, which was a nearby theater. But I think they recorded one song there, but then they got shut down for noise complaints. And so then they moved to, I guess it was a hotel. They had a hotel room or something, and then they converted it into a live room suitable for recording. And then, of course, Smoke on the Water, like we're already saying, is the story about, usually, groups make up stories for songs, but this is a true story about them going to record this album. And the thing I like about it is, okay, first of all, the opening riff is like one of the most recognizable riffs in heavy rock music of all time. And the thing is, it's really easy. Like it's a basic, like it's a 4-chord thing or a 4-note riff thing that, I'm sure Richie probably made up in 2 seconds, and it's like their most popular song ever, pretty much. Oh, yeah. And I'm sure it's been covered by many, many bands. And Blackmore actually claimed that the main riff was an interpretation of Symphony No. 5 by Ludwig van Beethoven, which is another classical thing. Oh. And he says that I owe him a lot of money. I guess he owes Beethoven a lot of money for giving him the idea for this.
And I love the story there where they went into I like the story where they went into kind of the auditorium where they recorded one song, and the police ended up showing up, and they tried to barricade themselves in there. That would be really cool. And they got one song recorded and then kind of got kicked out of there. It's hilarious. You can't write this.
And you mentioned this on the last song there about the single. This was the 3rd single from the album, but they didn't release it till the next year, so 1973, because they didn't expect people to like the song as much as they did, probably because it was so easy. It was just a quick little thing. Here, let's play this song about the place burning down. So they didn't think people were going to like it so much. So then they thought, oh, we better release it as a single now. And the song reached number 4 on the US Billboard single charts, and it reached number 2 in Canada's single charts, and number 2 in Canada was the highest it ranked in any country anywhere. So I guess us Canadians know what we're doing. And I got some interesting things here. Not you might have came across this too, but there's some world records that were involved with some to do with the song. In 1994, in Vancouver, Canada, they had 1,322 guitarists gathered to play the riff, Smoke on the Water, until they made the Guinness Book of World Records. But then in 2007 in Kansas City, that was broken by 1,721 guitarists. And then 20 days later, in a German city, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, they had over 1,800 people playing the riff, Smoke on the Water. And then again in 2009 in Poland, they really broke the record with 6,346 guitar players, and one of them being Steve Morse, who is in Deep Purple now, or in the later albums, as it was at Thanks Jimmy Festival, which I assume is a Jimi Hendrix festival. So and I also forgot to mention something earlier I was going to mention. They also were in the Guinness Book of World Records in, now let me find it here, 1972, for being the loudest band in the world. But I'm sure that's been broken now. But so I don't know who has a current record. But I'm sure that has been broken now by somebody. Anything else to say? Oh, sorry.
When you think about it, though, I mean, those are record breaking. This is a song that's been stamped on like society, and I mean, it is such, it probably isn't my favorite song on the album. Probably my top 2, my top 3, only because it's probably been played so much. But I always try to work in maybe a deeper track when I'm, to make myself seem maybe a little bit more mysterious. I don't know, but that is it. I mean, that guitar riff, you just can't get away from it. And it's, I mean, a phenomenal song.
Yes. And I was going to say something else about Smoke on the Water. I guess it doesn't matter. I don't remember what I was going to say now. But yes, definitely. Oh, I was going to say that I can even play this on the guitar. That's how easy it is. Because I'm not a good guitarist. I have a guitar, but yeah, Smoke on the Water is like, hey, well, I can play that. Like, so, and my wife would go, hey, that's Smoke on the Water. And she doesn't even listen to it. Okay, then we go to track 2 on side 2, which is Lazy. And I'll let you talk first about Lazy, I guess.
Oh, well, I mean, this is probably the second one you're talking about with those killer, that Hammond organ and the keyboards. I mean, this is another awesome song. I mean, it starts off with that Hammond organ intro into the killer guitar riff. And I mean, it's kind of almost a repeat of so far almost the whole album. I mean, it's a great track, and I absolutely love it. I mean, those, like you said earlier, with the Hammond organ and the keyboards, adding that and making it such a big part of the band, but of this album, and then this album being so successful for them, and I think they were leading up to the success within Rock and Fireball, and then releasing this, and but I think making that kind of getting almost as equal play in some songs as the guitar in some way. I mean, I think that's pretty groundbreaking, and that's pretty neat. So got to call that out for sure.
Well, actually, that was one of the things. I don't think I mentioned this earlier. I had it wrote down, but like John Lord really liked classical music. And so they did a bunch of stuff with classical orchestras. But Ritchie Blackmore said, I want to make a rock album. So we're going to do what I want to do now. We've done the classical thing that you wanted to do, John Lord, I mean. He goes, let's do a rock album or some rock album and see how that goes. And well, John Lord adapted, and it was a good decision, I think.
Totally.
And I'll say about Lazy. Yeah. So when you start listening to Lazy, you think, oh, this must be an instrumental, because it's like 4.5 minutes into the song before Ian Gillan appears on vocals. I think he was on harmonica earlier in the song. But yeah, it's not until like 4.5 minutes in when he finally says, you're lazy, just stay in bed. But so the lyrics aren't too in depth on the album. It's, you're so lazy that if you're drowning, you can't even save yourself or whatever. So it's a pretty basic lyric song, but yes, I love it. And the John Lord's playing, like I said, and trading off solos between the keyboard, your organ player, keyboard player, and your guitarist, and bass and drums, of course, too. So yes, it's probably one of my favorite ones on this album, and of Deep Purple in general. And then we end with Space Truckin', and I'll just say a quick thing about that first. course, the song is about space travel, but I'm not sure how that is achieved, if it's with drugs or what. I'm not really sure. But the thing I love about the song, which really has nothing to do with on the album, but is it's like a 4 minute, 4.5 minute song. But when they play it live, it turns into 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Like if you get Made in Japan live album and a few other ones, it's always a long song. It's the song they choose to, let's do a whole bunch of solos and let's jam. And I just love that about when groups back then. I think they did it a lot more back then than they do nowadays. Bands don't really do it, like Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin or even Sabbath or whatever would go off on these big solos and jamming things. And that's what I liked about their live albums and live shows, is that they didn't just play the songs, they had some fun too outside of just playing the songs. So what do you think of Space Trucking?
Oh, I love it. I mean, one of the little factoids I picked up was that the actual riff, the high half step riffs, were kind of composed, like based around the theme. It was inspired by the theme music for the old Batman TV show. So I thought that was pretty cool. So I've listened to it a million times. I never really picked up on it. And then when I read that, I was like, oh, okay. I got into it and I said, yeah, I think I can hear it now. So that was pretty neat. But yeah, it's a great track for sure. It finishes off the album. It finishes off on that high, and I think they were, because that's what I think the space travel was, as you indicated. And but it was that's a great track to finish the album off on, and I just love it, and it's one of my top end of the album, which is only 7 songs, so somebody has to come in 7th and 6th. So
You'd almost kind of think they might have ended with Lazy, actually, just because of the way the song was, a long one. But no, it doesn't really matter what order you put songs anymore, especially. But anyway, yes, and I was going to mention, because that's a great side there with just the 3 songs: Smoke on the Water, Lazy, and Space Truck, and all classics that they probably play live a lot. Those 3 songs still to this day, since they had an album out I think it was last year, maybe it was 2 years ago now, but I think it might have been last year. But it's good to see that they're still going in some capacity there. But there's no there's no weird slow songs like they did on some of the other albums. Like it's all pretty, even like with maybe Amaleo or Never Before, they're still pretty heavy and rocking and everything like that. So that's why it's one of my favorites. Well, it's my favorite Deep Purple album. Now, would Perfect Strangers be your favorite Deep Purple album, or would it be this one or another one?
No, it would be this one's my favorite Deep Purple album. I would say, and then I kind of jumped to, I really like Burn quite a bit. I'd say that's probably my second. I love that album. And then I would say probably I need to get into the stuff pre In Rock, the first couple albums, because I haven't really even gone that far. So I really got to get into that, and I definitely will. I'm always, as you know, I'm always buying more and more, picking up more and more stuff all the time. But definitely it's my favorite. It's pretty close. I don't want to give anything away to almost my favorite of the 1970s. But and another thing too, the cover. I believe Iron Maiden did a cover of Space Truckin' as well on. I think they did there was a tribute to Deep Purple, and I think they did it on there. So I've heard it a couple of times, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm sure there's been lots of covers of Deep Purple songs over the years by many years. And I know that Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin were 2 of Iron Maiden's influences.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons because I knew that I listened to Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, probably mostly radio stuff I would hear, because when I read a story about this group called Iron Maiden, which I knew nothing about, it said they were influenced by Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin, and that's why I thought, well, I want to start listening to Iron Maiden because they're influenced by 2 of the bands that I really like.
Right.
So that's how that came about for me anyway. So I definitely listened to them before I heard Iron Maiden, because I was talking on the Black Sabbath podcast to the guys about I didn't listen to Black Sabbath as much as Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, and I even
Yeah,
listened to like Iron Maiden and Merciful Fate and all these groups before I even really listened to Black Sabbath that much. That's why I wasn't as big a fan as they were, as they
right.
probably listened to it more so before the other heavy metal that came along after, where I got Black Sabbath later in life, I guess you could call it,
Yeah,
except
and
for
I was surprised.
Paranoid.
I think you rated Paranoid as 6.5. Was it
I said six, yeah.
6? Okay.
Well, I said on the pod, I haven't listened to this album in like 30 years. I've listened to songs. Like I said, I really like Fairies Wear Boots. I like that song. And I've heard Iron Man, of course, and Paranoid and War Pigs.
War Pigs.
But just overall, I just didn't listen to a lot of Ozzy's Black Sabbath. I listened to Dio's Sabbath or Ian Gillan's Sabbath
Yeah,
album more than I did the Ozzy Sabbath albums because I had so much else going on. I had Iron Maiden albums and then thrash came
yeah,
along
that's
and I
right.
was really into thrash. So it was like, well, I'm not going to go back to the slower stuff that Sabbath
Yeah.
did in the early years. But of course, I know they're important to heavy metal, of course. But, and like I said, I just listened to Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple more. It was just more to my liking, I guess, for me.
Absolutely.
So anyway, what's your rating of out of 10 for this album's
I got to go with a 10. I got to go with a 10. I mean, this, will it make my top 10? I think I'm giving it away that it will be in there somewhere. But this, and my top 10 of the 1970s albums will be pretty much, these are all going to be 10s, because I love these albums from these bands. And I got to admit, it was hard to place them. And it was even hard, I think, right up until an hour before this, I was still scratching them out and adding lots of honorable mentions. So, but no, it's a 10 for sure. I mean, this is the quintessential heavy metal album, and I think it stands up to today. You can listen to it if you want to get into a more traditional, like really groovy, a lot of blues, which I like. And it's just it's got that covered, and it's just I mean, it's a great album from start to finish. There's really not a filler track or a bad track on it, in my opinion.
Yes, and I would also give it 10 out of 10. I don't think I have to say anything else about it. So yes, as you mentioned, it was a little because sometimes we do the top 10 for the year that an album came out, but 1972, I don't know if there would even be 10 hard rock heavy metal albums to have on a list. So I thought let's do the whole 70s, so 1970 to 1979. And yes, I realize it was very hard. But and I had probably 20 in my first initial list. I probably had 20 down there, so I had to knock 10 off. And so this isn't really, so I don't want people complaining and saying, oh, this group's not heavy metal, this group's not heavy metal. So this is really our top 10 hard rock heavy metal albums, whatever you want to call it, of the 1970s. So I guess we'll do yours first. And now you don't have to give a rating to every album or nothing like that.
No,
And you can
sure.
mention honorable mentions or maybe wait till I'm done and then see if any of mine were your honorable mentions. So
Yeah,
start with
sure.
your number 10 if you did them and if you ranked them 1 to 10, that is. So start
Yeah.
with your number 10 of the
My
70s.
number 10 is the Kiss debut album, 1974. I mean, another great album. Love this album. I kind of bumped some of my other ones off, and I was just battling with it, but I got to give props to Kiss at number 10. I could easily have fallen into my honorable mention, but it's my favorite album Kiss ever put out, and I think it's their best one.
Okay.
Number 9, this one might be a little bit off the wall, but I'm a huge Scorpions fan. So I fought myself onto which one I was going to put through, but my favorite Scorpions album of all time is Taken by Force, 1977. Absolutely love that album, and I know, there's Virgin Keller. There's a lot of great 1970s Scorpions album. I even really like the debut album, Lonesome Crow, which I know gets a lot of heat, especially in North America. But I mean, it's got my favorite song on it, "We'll Burn the Sky," and I absolutely love that album. So it kind of a different one. But number 8, I kind of fall back into one of my favorite bands of all time. Blue Oyster Cult. I got to go with Agents of Fortune, 1976. I mean, this could have even been higher, but I've got some other ones on there that I just, it's just the way it falls. My favorite song on that is Tattoo Vampire, but I mean, it's got classics on there with, Don't Fear the Reaper. Love that album. My number 7 is kind of another funny one, which it's just got that. It was the first metal album I ever really listened to. I had that copy of it that I accidentally bought. Judas Priest, Sin After Sin, 1977. I mean, you can get, Dissident Aggressor on that album is just phenomenal. It's been covered by so many bands, and the whole album I absolutely love. And I really think that, they were really gaining massive momentum by then. I mean, they had a lot of great albums coming out, and a lot of people, again, their debut album, they're not super into it, but they kind of just kept growing and growing. And I think that's one that really, really brought in the Judas Priest sound. Number 6, I'm not the biggest Led Zeppelin fan, but I got to give Physical Graffiti, from 1975. A lot of love. I mean, I love this album. It's got my favorite song on it with Kashmir. So obviously, I'm not a massive fan. I probably only have about 3 or 4 other albums and maybe a few greatest hits albums, but it was such an important band and album to the metal movement as far as I'm concerned. And people I know will say, well, it's not heavy metal. Nah, I classify it definitely as heavy metal.
Yes.
My number 5 pick is the Van Halen debut. I mean, being a child of the 80s, I remember hearing about 81 or 82 Eruption. And I mean, Running with the Devil, amazing debut album. Still my favorite Van Halen album of all time. I don't think it can get any better. And I know there'll be a lot of people out there who argue this, but 1 and 2 are just so amazing. Number 4, 1976, Thin Lizzy, Jailbreak. I could have easily put a couple of Thin Lizzy albums on here, tried to keep it to one album for one band with one album rather than just filling it with multiple albums. But Thin Lizzy, Jailbreak, again, my favorite song, Cowboy Song, Emerald on there. I absolutely love it. Number 3, Black Sabbath, Paranoid. I loved you guys all doing the the podcast there last week on that album. It's my favorite Black Sabbath album. I next to some of the Dio stuff, which I absolutely love as well. But I mean, this was just such an important album. I absolutely love it. And then number 2 is actually this album, Deep Purple, Machine Head. It's my number 2 pick. I've talked a lot about it. Only bows down to my number 1 pick of Rainbow Rising. I mean, I love Rainbow. I love Rainbow Rising. I think Stargazer is the best song ever written. So very passionate about it. I love that song. Tarot Woman on there is just Tarot Woman is amazing. And you've got Blackmore on there. So, it's like, what the heck? Dio, Jimmy Bain, Cozy Powell. I mean, this is another, great lineup, and what a phenomenal album. So I'll save my couple honorable mentions I have for after when you're done, because you're probably going to pick a couple of them.
Maybe we'll see, because we only matched. I think I only had 4 of those on my list.
Whoa.
I think. Well, I might make 4 or 5 at the most. I know the first, I think 3 didn't match. Okay. No. I'm going to mention a few honorable mentions before I start, only because I felt they were, even though it's still hard rock, I just felt like it didn't belong on the list. But there are 4 albums that I really liked from the 70s. One was Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell. In 1977, and also in 1977 was Queen's News of the World. I really love, because this is all stuff that I used to listen to before I probably started hearing Deep Purple and Led Zeppelin. I was hearing this stuff because it was actually played on the radio more. Outside of, Stairway to Heaven was played on the radio, but there wasn't that much other stuff that was played on the radio. And then Canada's April Wine with Harder, Faster. I didn't write down the year of that one, but I used to have that on 8-track while I played pool in my basement of my house with my parents' house. So I love some April Wine there. And then Sweet's Desolation Boulevard, which was 1974. And of course, if anybody knows Sweet, it had the Ballroom Blitz on it. So if you don't know the Ballroom Blitz, then you're not going to know who Sweet is. Now I have some other honorable mentions, but I'm going to save them for after my top 10 because they're more heavier and would fit better on the list. So now I didn't go with your thing about only putting one group on the list. So I have a group multiple times, which you might be able to guess. But anyway, number 10, I'm starting with Led Zeppelin and Led Zeppelin 3 from 1970. And I'm not going to talk about the album, but it had Immigrant Song, or no, it was at 3. Yes, it had Immigrant Song on it. Oh no, was that Immigrant? Yeah, I'm going to say it had Immigrant Song on that one. And it wasn't the heaviest full album, but there was some great songs in it. And of course, Led Zeppelin 2, which came out in 69, was probably heavier than Led Zeppelin 3. But since it wasn't in the 70s, I can't include that one. Number 9, I got Van Halen's debut album, like you did, in 1978. Number 8, I got Aerosmith with Toys in the Attic from 1975. Now, maybe people will think, well, that shouldn't be on here, but hair metal, Aerosmith, that could have been, they're probably one of the creators of hair metal, kind of Aerosmith, except they didn't have makeup on or anything like that. But of course, that has Walk This Way on it, Sweet Emotion, Dream On. Like, it's pretty much a classic, that one.
Yeah.
And number 7, I got Alice Cooper with Welcome to My Nightmare. And that was 1975. And I love this album. I still like all of these albums. Like, I was going to say this before I started, but they're in my top 10 because I still listen to these albums regularly. Yeah. Still say, what do I want to listen to? Oh, let's listen to Alice Cooper, Welcome to My Nightmare tonight. It's the only Alice Cooper album I listen to ever now. Like, I've listened to him before. And there's a few songs I'll hear, Schools Out, things like that, whatever. But this album, I love this album. It's all weird and probably drug induced and things with some weird stuff on it. And Vincent Price is on it. Yeah. Can't beat that. And see, number 6 is Rainbow Rising, which you had there. I love that album too, but there's so many good albums here. So, tomorrow I could have had it up higher than 6. But yes, I love that one. One of my honorable mentions was Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow, which also was Dio, the album before that in 1975, but he just changed the name. So it wasn't just all about him, I guess. He thought he should change the name. And number 5, I have AC/DC with Highway to Hell, which came out in 1979. Because I love Bon Scott, AC/DC. Like, I think if there was a 4th band that was pioneers of heavy metal, it would be AC/DC, just because they were heavy and they were raunchy. And of course, Angus Young guitar work and stuff. And sure, their songs are pretty easy, a lot of them too. So that would fit along with Smoke on the Water. With songs like Hell and stuff like that. Now, I forgot to look it up, but Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, which is another album I love, which did come out in the 70s in Australia, but it didn't come out in North America until after Highway to Hell. Right. I was reading. So I could have included Dirty Deeds in here because it probably really is a album before 1979. But since I was reading that it wasn't really released in North America until 81, I left it off the list just for that reason. But Dirty Deeds could have also been on this list because I love that album too. And number 4, we got Led Zeppelin with Physical Graffiti, like you had, 1975. That was a double album. And it's got so many great tracks on that album. Yeah. And my number 3 is Led Zeppelin 4 from 1971. And of course, that is probably their most well-known album, that one, because it has Stairway to Heaven on it. But Stairway to Heaven is my least favorite, probably Led Zeppelin song ever. Not ever, but it's a song because they would always play it on the radio at the New Year's Eve. They would always have their top 100 songs or whatever, and Stairway to Heaven would always be number 1 or whatever. Yeah. And it was just played so much. It was like, God, I hate this song, except for the part right at the end of the song where they pick up and get heavy. So the slow part. But now I can appreciate it more that I'm older and I appreciate the song, but still I like songs like Black Dog and Battle of Evermore and When the Levee Breaks and stuff. It's just a great album. And I also love that it doesn't even have their name on the album. It doesn't even say Led Zeppelin anywhere. But you just know it's Led Zeppelin, because I remember watching a documentary on it and the label said, well, we got to put your name on it. And they says, no, we don't want our name on it. And they said, okay. And there it is, probably the best-selling album ever, and it doesn't even have their name on the cover. doesn't have anything on the cover. I mean, a name or a number or nothing. They just called it
Yep.
Led Zeppelin 4 because it was their fourth album. Number two, which I don't know, you didn't have this on your list, so maybe this is an honorable mention. I don't know. Montrose with their debut album, Montrose, of course, in 1973, with probably the only album I ever listened to that has Sammy Hagar on vocals.
Yeah. Great album.
I'm not really a Sammy Hagar fan, really, for like Van Halen, and maybe I Can't Drive 55 was an okay song. But yeah, I love this album. I love the Montrose album with Bad Motor Scooter. I mentioned the shortwave radio station. I remember hearing Bad Motor Scooter on that. And that's when I first heard Montrose, was through that, hearing that song. And I thought I got to get this album. And I love that album. It's actually pretty similar, I find it, to Deep Purple's Machine Head, that album. Oh, I love every song on it. I don't skip any of them. So that's why it's number two, which of course tells you that Machine Head is number one of my albums in the 70s. But it was tough. I was almost going to say Montrose, but so it's really close. And even Led Zeppelin 4, like there's a few, like any of them, almost any of the top six, like Rainbow Rising, Highway to Hell, they could all be number one, really. But I just decided we're going with Deep Purple. And I'll mention a few of my other honorable mentions. Well, there was Deep Purple in rock, but it wasn't as good as this one, so I left that off. Motorhead's Overkill album. It's a great album. That was from 79. Has a lot of the classic tracks on it. Two other AC/DC albums, High Voltage in 76, Let There Be Rock in 77. And then I've already mentioned Ritchie Blackmore, Rainbow in 75. And then I also had Ted Nugent's debut album from 1975, because I love Ted Nugent too, back then, especially, as again, he would have been somebody I listened to before I discovered heavy metal. So, and he was a guitar guy too. And so that was my other honorable mentions. Did you have some other honorable mentions that I didn't mention?
Yeah, I would go with like a couple that I wanted. I can't believe you said Queen, News of the World. I was like, I had that as high as 5 at one point. And then I was just messing around and I was like, I'm sorry, Freddie, I gotta kick you to the curb here. I gotta fit this in. So I was actually pleased. I was like, wow, we just said that. That's cool. Rush, 2112. I mean, I'm more of an 80s Rush fan because I guess I grew up with Deep Purple that way as well, and I didn't really go back as far. I more like it now than I did when I was younger, and I listen to the full Rush catalog probably a lot more frequently. Not a metal band, but I'm a huge Doors fan, and I love LA Woman's probably one of my favorite hard rock albums of all time. I really like that one. I mean, I like a lot of the Doors stuff, but that's definitely my favorite one. And you're saying albums from an AC/DC, I'm sitting there going, but in 1979, I also love Bomber. It's one of my favorite Motorhead albums. I think they released 2 albums with Overkill and Bomber that year, which was kind of neat as well. But I mean, their debut album as well, you can't go wrong with. So I wanted to show Motorhead some love, but just couldn't do it. I've got some, like, my Scorpions pick was a little bit of my personal thing and very passionate about it. And same with the Judas Priest one, but there could have been another 2 Judas Priest ones on that list as well. And Deep Purple Burn is probably my second favorite Deep Purple album. I love that album, and it pained me. I had it at 8 and 9, and then it sort of fell off as I went. But those are some of my honorable mentions for sure. But Montrose is a great pick. I totally escaped me when I was writing stuff down. And that's a great album. That's awesome.
Yes, and they didn't really make anything else that was that great, I didn't think, but yeah, that was a great one. And you mentioned Queen, and I mentioned Queen, and yeah, before I listened to even the harder rock stuff, I would listen to Queen and Styx and April Wine and even Supertramp and stuff like that. So that's the stuff I grew up on before I really discovered the heavier rock stuff. So there's a few Queen albums I like, and Brian May was on that Ritchie Blackmore documentary I mentioned. Brian May, because I think they were friends, and Brian May was on there talking about how great Ritchie was and telling some stories. And they definitely had their heavier moments. They also had their softer moments, of course, but they had some good heavy stuff back then with, of course, We Will Rock You was on News of the World.
Yeah. And Sheer Heart Attack. I mean,
Yes.
that is a wicked track. It's probably one of my favorite Queen songs.
And Testament covered Sheer Heart Attack on one of their
Yes.
albums. I love that too.
That's awesome.
So anyway, so yes, that was interesting. Top 10 of the 70s. It was, I guess it makes sense that we did have a lot different because, you know, there was a lot to cook 9 years, even though it was just starting out, the heavy metal part of it. But, you know, there was lots of hard rock that led up to it. So I don't know, it was pretty interesting. I thought, well, we did that list there. And I had 3 Led Zeppelins on my list. So that tells you that I really like Led Zeppelin. So
absolutely.
Okay, so that's it. So that was good. Thank you for joining me today, Jim.
No problem. I had a blast. It was fun. I love talking about music. Love talking about metal, love talking about music. It's my favorite pastime. So this was
okay. So everybody make sure you check us out on our website, www.themetalpit.org. And like I said, if you want to email the podcast, you can email us at podcast@themetalpit.org. And thank you for listening. Goodbye.